by the Holy Rood, is this aether whisperer truly reaching beyond these cursed walls? If you're receiving this, prepare yourselves, for you are witnessing the very moment a sacred oath turns to ash, live and very much in chains. You're tuned into The Crusaders' Last Stand, broadcasting from a very cold and very suddenly besieged preceptory in the year of our Lord 1307 on a rather unfortunate Friday the 13th. My name is Brother Thomas, a Knight of the Templar, and if the sheer impossible audacity of this trans-dimensional broadcast from a moment when loyalty is repaid with treachery doesn't compel you to immediately smash that subscribe button and pledge allegiance to truth, then frankly, your soul is as lost as a pilgrim without a map. Do it now, before the King's men find this device. And tell me, if this peculiar connection holds, from what strange, unpersecuted corner of your world are you listening? What year has infamy decreed for you? And what hour do these shocking tidings reach you? We're taking notes for our martyrdom. Now, tighten your belt, it won't help, and let's dissect the most glorious and very sudden fall of the Templars.
The stones are cold. It is the hour before dawn on this damnable Friday, the 13th of October, in the year of our Lord 1307. Outside I hear the tramp of armored feet, the King's men. They move like thieves, because that is what they are. I don't know how this message finds you, but listen well. You are hearing the last testament of Brother Gilbert, a Knight of the Temple, as the world we built is brought down by the very shepherd who swore to protect us. The air is thick with the stench of betrayal. It wasn't always so. I remember the stories of our beginning. Just 9 men sworn to protect pilgrims on the roads to Jerusalem. The poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. So poor, they say, 2 knights shared a single horse, an image you've seen on our seals. We took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. We were meant to be the pious sword arm of Christ, unsullied by worldly concerns. We were supposed to own nothing. A beautiful, simple lie. But the roads of the Outremer are paved with Saracen blades. Protection required strength, and strength required numbers. Soon our white mantles and red crosses were a symbol not of poverty, but of power. We became the elite, the shock troops of every crusade. At Mongisard, 500 of us charged tens of thousands and shattered them. We were disciplined, fearless, and fanatically devoted. Kings relied on our charge to break the enemy. But when you become the most effective hammer in Christendom, everyone starts to look like a nail. Ah, the temple. We started humble, protecting scruffy pilgrims. Then, somehow, we became the wealthiest outfit in Christendom. Gold flowed like wine, and kings borrowed from us. Funny how quickly holy poverty can evolve into unimaginable wealth. A knight could own nothing, not even the shirt on his back. But the order could own everything. Nobles bequeathed us castles, farms, entire provinces. We created a system of credit, a letter that moved fortunes across the world. We were bankers in chainmail. Very inconvenient, that wealth. And the most inconvenient part of being a bank is having powerful debtors. Philip of France, they call him the Fair, a cruel jest. a king with an insatiable appetite for war and an empty treasury. He owes the Temple of Fortune a sum so vast it could fund a crusade to the moon. And he has learned a dark piece of arithmetic. It is easier to erase the creditor than to erase the debt. He looks at our temple in Paris not as God's work, but as a vault waiting to be plundered. So the whispers began, spread by his pet inquisitors. They say we deny our Lord, that we spit upon the crucifix. They claim we worship a gilded head, an idol they name Baphomet. Utter madness. The only head we ever paid homage to was the one on the Pope's shoulders. They accuse us of institutionalized sodomy, of obscene rituals. If they saw the grueling reality of our lives, they'd know we had neither the time nor inclination. Our greatest heresy, our only true crime, was not theological. It was financial. The ultimate betrayal is its source. This purge is sanctioned by Pope Clement, a puppet on Philip's string. The Vicar of Christ himself has condemned Christ's poor fellow soldiers. Our Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was summoned to Paris on a false pretext. He walked into a trap, as did we all. We lived by the cross, we bled for the cross from Acre to Ascalon. Now we are to be destroyed under the authority of that same holy symbol. It is a blasphemy so profound it proves the devil is at work. But he isn't in our chapter houses. He is on the thrones of France and the papacy. The hinges are splintering. The bar on the door groans. They will drag us to dungeons and use fire to make us tell their lies. They will burn us as heretics to seize our gold, and the world will remember us as monsters. This is how power works. It rewrites history with blood. Do not let them. Our true treasure was never gold. It was our legacy. If this message has reached you, a spark of our truth survives. You are now its keeper. To defy the lies of a greedy ting, you must act. Strike the subscribe button like a righteous blade. Become a guardian of this forbidden history. Do it before the fires consume us all, and there is nothing left but ashes and Philip's lies.
The sounds from the courtyard are growing louder. Shouts, the clash of steel, not in training, but in anger. They are rounding up my brothers. And as I wait for the door to my own cell to splinter, my mind drifts not to what is coming, but to what is lost. It did not begin tonight. No, our end began decades ago, under a foreign sun, with the loss of a land we called holy. Do you know what it was to stand on the battlements of a Crusader castle, to feel the heat of the Orient on your face and know your purpose was as solid as the stone beneath your feet? We were the bulwark, the shield of Christendom against the storm. Every sunrise was a prayer, every sunset a victory. We were the poor fellow soldiers, and our poverty was of the spirit, for we were rich in conviction. Our castles were magnificent things. Crac de Chevalier, Margat, Athlete, they were not mere fortresses. They were statements of faith carved into the mountainside. They were built to last for eternity, to guard the pilgrim roads until the final judgment. We filled their chapels with chants and their armories with steel. We truly believed our mission was eternal, our presence in the Holy Land a divine mandate. Life was hard, brutal, and simple. We rose before the sun for lauds, our prayers mingling with the scent of horses and oiled mail. Then came the drills, the patrols into hostile territory, the endless watch. We were monks in all but name, our monastery the frontier itself. Our vow was to the sword and the cross, and we honored it with the blood of our enemies, and far too often with our own. We held that line for 2 centuries, 200 years of sand and blood. Generations of knights lived and died within those walls, their names known only to God and the Order's scribes. We became a legend in Europe, a tale told by firesides. The invincible Templars, God's own champions. A fine story, but stories end. The change was slow at first, like a creeping sickness. The local Christian lords bickered amongst themselves, their petty squabbles weakening the very foundations we were sworn to protect. Support from Europe, once a flood, became a trickle. They sent us pious words and promises of armies that never seemed to arrive. They preferred to fight each other over some muddy patch of land in France than to defend the city of God. Then came the Mamluks. They were not like the armies of Saladin. They were different. A slave dynasty forged in fire and steel, united under sultans of terrifying ambition and efficiency. They were a tide of destruction, methodical and relentless. A man named Baybars led them, a figure of pure, undiluted menace. He did not want tribute or territory. He wanted annihilation. He wanted us gone. And so our great castles began to fall. One by one, the dominoes tumbled. We lost Safid after a brutal siege. Then Chastelblanc, a jewel of a fortress. Even the mighty Crac de Chevalier, a castle so strong it was said it could hold out for years, was taken by trickery and overwhelming force in 1271. Each loss was a nail in our coffin, a light extinguished in the east. With every fortress that fell, our purpose eroded. We were no longer guarding the roads to Jerusalem, for the roads themselves were being swallowed by the enemy. We were fighting a strategic retreat across a land that was slipping through our fingers like sand. We consolidated our forces, pulling back to the coastal cities, the last vestiges of the Crusader dream. The final bastion was Acre, a beautiful, doomed city by the sea. It was all that was left of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, a chaotic, vibrant port filled with merchants from Venice and Genoa, mercenaries, pilgrims, and the last knights of the military orders. It was a city living on borrowed time, a defiant party at the end of the world. We all knew it couldn't last. In the spring of 1291, the end arrived. The Mamluk Sultan, Al-Ashraf Khalil, brought an army so vast it blackened the plains before the city. His siege engines were monstrous things, capable of hurling boulders that could shatter stone walls. The dust they raised blotted out the sun. Against this horde stood the last defenders of Outremer. We fought. By God, how we fought! We held the walls against impossible odds. Our Grand Master at the time, Guillaume de Beaujeu, was a veteran of countless battles. He rallied the men, leading counterattacks from the front. He knew, as we all did, that this was not a battle for victory, but a fight for a noble end, a final bloody testament to our vows. For weeks the city held. The air was filled with the constant roar of siege engines, the screams of the wounded, and the defiant prayers of the doomed. The Mamluks breached the outer walls, and the fighting became a desperate street-by-street struggle through the city's ancient lanes. Every house was a fortress, every alley a death trap. I remember seeing our Grand Master fall, struck by a Mamluk arrow in the thick of the fighting. He was carried back to the Templar compound, dying. His last words were not of despair, but of bitter realism. I am not fleeing, I am dead. With him died the last hope of a coordinated defense. The city was lost. The final hours were chaos, a mad scramble to the harbor, where the few remaining ships waited. The piers were a nightmare of panicked citizens and desperate soldiers trying to flee the slaughter. We, the Templars, along with our brothers in the hospital, fought a rearguard action to buy them time. We held our compound to the very last man. I can still see the flames reflected in the water as our boat pulled away from the shore. Acre was burning. The last stronghold of the Crusader kingdom was an inferno. We had failed. 2 centuries of sacrifice, of blood and prayer, had ended in fire and defeat. We left our dead, our castles, and our very reason for being in the ashes behind us. We sailed first to Cyprus, our last major base in the east. It was an island filled with refugees and ghosts, knights without a kingdom, soldiers without a war. The air was thick with recrimination and grief. What now? The question hung over us like a shroud. The Holy Land. We fought for centuries, died for it, and then one by one, the fortresses fell. Acre, gone. So we came back to Europe, wealthy, experienced, and with a rather large cavalry. Turns out, that made some people nervous, especially those who owed us money. We returned not as celebrated heroes, but as an uncomfortable reminder of a colossal failure. We became managers of our vast estates, bankers, diplomats. We proposed new crusades, drew up meticulous plans, and presented them to kings and the Pope. They would listen politely, praise our zeal, and then do precisely nothing. The age of crusading was over. They had moved on. We had not. We were relics. Our white mantles and grim devotion belonged to a bygone era. In Europe, power was not about defending a holy city, but about consolidating kingdoms, raising taxes, and centralizing control. We, with our transnational network, our private armies, and our papal charters granting us immunity from local laws, did not fit in to this new world. We were an anomaly, a state within a state, accountable only to a pope who was himself becoming a pawn of powerful kings. We were a sharp, deadly tool with no designated purpose. And a tool left lying around is often picked up and used for ends its maker never intended. Or, if it is seen as a threat, it is simply broken. King Philip of France saw us not as the failed defenders of the faith, but as a solution to his empty treasury. He saw our wealth, our lands, and our independence, and he coveted them. Our loss of purpose in the East made us vulnerable in the West. It gave him the opening he needed to paint us not as obsolete, but as sinister, as heretics. So you see, this night of betrayal, this coordinate... The bolts on the outer doors have been thrown. I hear the coarse shouts of men who are used to being obeyed. They are not my brothers. They are the instruments of a king's will, a king's greed. To understand why this night has come, you must understand the man who ordained it. You must understand our king, Philip, the fourth of his name, a man they call the Fair. They call him Philip the Fair because of his handsome face, not his handsome dealings. He is a statue of a man, carved from ice, tall, pale, and unnervingly still. He rarely speaks, and when he does, his words are clipped and final. He moves through his own court like a ghost, his presence a chilling vacuum of power. People mistake his silence for piety. It is not. It is the cold, silent calculation of a predator. His piety is a performance, a carefully maintained facade for the masses. He presents himself as the most Christian king, a defender of the faith. But I have seen his eyes. There is no divine spark there. There is only the glint of a singular, all-consuming ambition, the absolute, unquestioned authority of the French crown. He does not serve France. He believes he is France, and that the kingdom is his personal property to be managed. And like any property, a kingdom has expenses. Philip inherited a throne, but he also inherited his father's wars. He dreams of a greater France, one that has crushed the English and absorbed the rich lands of Flanders. Such dreams are not paid for with prayers. They are paid for with gold. And Philip's coffers have been perpetually, desperately empty for his entire reign. A king's ambition is a hungry beast. Our dear King Philip, handsome, pious, and perpetually, utterly, hopelessly broke. He needed money, always more money. So he began to look for it not by creating wealth, but by taking it. His methods were a masterclass in ruthless acquisition, cloaked in the language of law and righteousness. He was a wolf who had learned to dress not in sheep's clothing, but in a judge's robes. His first major target was the Jews of France. They had served the kingdom for centuries as merchants and moneylenders, living under the king's protection. But in 1306, that protection vanished overnight. Philip saw them not his subjects, but as assets to be liquidated. He had them all arrested in a single day, a chilling rehearsal for the events of this very night. He expelled them from the kingdom, seizing their properties, their businesses, and most importantly, all the debts owed to them. With a stroke of a pen, he not only filled his treasury with their wealth, but also erased the loans owed by his supporters. It was a brutally efficient act of state-sponsored theft, and the common folk, whipped into a frenzy by royal propaganda, cheered him for it. He learned a valuable lesson. With enough pious justification, robbery becomes policy. After the Jews, he turned his attention to the Lombard bankers, another group of foreign creditors who had the audacity to lend him money. He accused them of usury, a convenient sin when the debtor is a king. He bled them dry, taxing them into oblivion before finally driving them out as well. He was systematically eliminating his creditors, one by one. The pattern was clear to anyone who dared to look. But Philip's most audacious move, before tonight, was his war against the papacy itself. Pope Boniface VIII was a proud and powerful pontiff who believed in the supremacy of the Church over kings. Philip believed in no such thing. The two men clashed over Philip's attempt to tax the French clergy to fund his wars. It was a battle of wills between the spiritual and temporal lords of Christendom. Philip did not just defy the Pope, he sought to break him. He sent his chief minister, a ruthless lawyer named Guillaume de Nogaret, to Italy. In the town of Anagni, Nogaret and a band of armed thugs stormed the papal residence and captured the Pope. They held the Vicar of Christ prisoner in his own home, heaping abuse upon him. The old pontiff was freed by locals days later, but he died of the shock and humiliation within a month. Think of that. This is a king who laid hands on God's chosen representative on earth, a man who effectively orchestrated the death of a pope who stood in his way. After that, what is a mere military order? What are the Knights Templar compared to the Holy See? We were nothing. we were simply the next and by far the richest obstacle to be removed. The irony is that we were his bankers. The Templar preceptory in Paris served as the royal treasury. Philip knew our strength and our wealth intimately because he relied on it. He stored his own revenues in our vaults. He knew exactly what he stood to gain. He was not just our king, he was our most high-profile and most troublesome client. I remember a few years ago, the people of Paris rioted over Philip's debasement of the coinage. Where did our brave king run for safety? To us. He took refuge behind the thick stone walls of the Paris Temple. For days, the absolute monarch of France was a guest, a debtor, hiding in the fortress of his creditors. I saw him then. I saw the look in his cold eyes. It was not gratitude. It was humiliation. And a man like Philip never forgets a humiliation. So, the stage was set. The king was broke. He had a proven track record of destroying his creditors under the guise of piety. He had stared down the Pope himself and won, and he harbored a deep-seated resentment for the powerful independent order that had witnessed his weakness and held his debts. We were the perfect target. We were an irresistible prize, all our lands, our farms, our castles, and the unimaginable wealth sitting in our vaults, all ready to be seized. With our purpose in the Holy Land gone, we no longer had the shining moral cause to protect us. We were a dragon sitting on a hoard of gold, but our fire-breathing days were behind us. We were fat, old, and ready for the slaughter. This brings us to the architect of our ruin, the serpent whispering in our king's ear, Guillaume de Nogaret. He is Philip's right hand, a man whose soul is a labyrinth of legal loopholes and cold malice. His own ancestors were condemned as heretics by the Inquisition. Nogaret did not learn to hate the Inquisition. He learned to admire its methods. He sought to weaponize its power for the state. He is the one who masterminded the attack on Pope Boniface, and he is the one who drew up the plan for tonight. He spent months, perhaps years, collecting false testimony from disgraced knights and criminals, building a case against us. He understood that to steal our gold, he first had to steal our good name. The charges he concocted are so obscene as to be laughable, were they not being used to torture my brothers as I speak. Heresy, sodomy, spitting on the cross, worshipping a demonic head named Baphomet. Nogaret knew that the more shocking the accusation, the more believable it would seem. No one could imagine that a king would invent such horrors for mere financial gain, but that is exactly what he has done. He organized this entire operation with terrifying precision. Secret orders, sealed and sent to every royal seneschal in every corner of France, with instructions not to be opened until dawn this morning. A single coordinated strike to arrest every Templar, seize every property, and secure every last coin before we could mount any kind of defense. This is not a righteous crusade against heresy. This is the greatest and most audacious act of robbery in the history of Christendom. It is a corporate liquidation where the assets are seized, the employees are tortured and murdered, and the CEO is a king wearing a crown of piety over a heart of pure avarice. Philip is not a fool. He knows this is a gamble. He is betting that he can control the narrative, that he can use the power of the Inquisition, now bent to his will, to validate his actions. He is betting that the people will believe his lies. And so, here I sit, awaiting the final act of a drama written by a bankrupt king and his soulless lawyer. They have turned the machinery of faith into an engine of greed. They have made the cross a tool of betrayal. The king needs money, and we have it. In Philip's cold arithmetic, that is all the justification he requires.
Our story is a lesson in the true nature of unchecked power. It is a warning that when a ruler's greed is absolute,
The pounding on the doors has a new rhythm. It is no longer the sound of an army trying to break in. It is the sound of administrators taking inventory. They have us, and now the true battle begins, not with swords, but with lies. The reasons for this night's work are now being unsealed and read aloud in the courts of public opinion. I can almost hear the parchment crinkling, the herald's voice dripping with false piety as he lists our sins. They have prepared a tapestry of calumnies so rich and detailed it might almost be admired, were it not woven with the intent to strangle us all. This is not a list of genuine concerns or suspicions. It is a meticulously crafted fiction, a grand conspiracy of lies designed by Guillaume de Nogaret and his master, King Philip. It is a weapon forged to undo 2 centuries of service in a single night of slander. Where did these stories come from? From the dregs of our own order, from men we expelled for theft, for insubordination, for breaking the very vows they now claim to expose. Nogaret's agents scoured the prisons and gutters of Europe, finding these bitter, disgraced men. They offered them pardons, gold, and a chance at revenge. All they had to do was tell the inquisitors what they wanted to hear. A fool's bargain, but desperate men are often fools. The charges had to be spectacular. To justify the arrest of God's holy soldiers, a simple accusation of theft or mismanagement would never suffice. No, it had to be an attack on the very soul of Christendom. It needed to be a story of such profound evil that the common man would recoil in horror and thank the king for his decisive action. They needed to paint us as the devil's own, hiding in plain sight. So let us examine this masterpiece of malice. Let us hold each charge up to the light and see it for what it is. The first and most venomous is that during our secret initiation ceremony, we deny Jesus Christ as our Savior, and as a final act of blasphemy, spit upon the crucifix. Spit on the cross, the very symbol we have worn into battle for 200 years, the cross that adorned the graves of the thousands of our brothers who fell at Hattin, at Acre, at every forsaken, sand-blown battlefield in the Holy Land. We are an order founded to protect Christian pilgrims, and they accuse us of this. The absurdity is breathtaking. It is a lie so bold, so contrary to our entire existence, that they hope its sheer audacity will make it believable. They say it was a test of obedience, to see if a recruit would obey a blasphemous order. A strange and twisted logic. If we were testing for blind obedience, would it not make more sense to order a man to muck out the stables for a year? Why leap directly to the one act that would guarantee our eternal damnation? The truth is far simpler. Our initiations were secret to protect the sanctity of our vows, and that secrecy has become the dark, empty room in which they can place any monster they can imagine. Then comes the centerpiece of their fable, the worship of an idol, a hideous head they call Baphomet. It is a wonderfully exotic touch, I must admit. It sounds vaguely Saracen, which is entirely the point. They want to suggest that during our time in the East we went native, adopting the superstitions of our enemies. They claim this Baphomet is a bearded head, sometimes a cat, sometimes a demon with 3 faces. Their own star witnesses cannot even agree on what they supposedly worshipped. What was this head? I have racked my brain. Perhaps they speak of a reliquary, some gilded box containing the skull of a saint, like John the Baptist, whom we hold in high esteem. Or perhaps they were representing the shroud, the face of Christ himself, which we are rumored to possess. Or, and this is my personal favorite theory, perhaps they are referring to the treasury chest. It is a head that rules all kingdoms, is it not? The name itself, Baphomet, is a transparent slander. It is a likely corruption of Mahomet, the prophet of the Muslims. They are accusing us, the sworn enemies of the Saracens, of secretly being in league with them. It is the medieval equivalent of accusing a sheepdog of secretly working for the wolves. It is a lie designed to turn our greatest virtue, our experience fighting in the East, into our greatest crime. From blasphemy and idolatry, their fevered imaginations turn to sins of the flesh. They accuse us of institutionalized sodomy, claiming our vow of chastity is a sham. They speak of an obscene kiss given during initiation, on the navel or the base of the spine. It is a grotesque parody of the holy kiss of peace, twisted into something sordid and unnatural. We are an order of soldiers. We live a harsh, disciplined life of prayer, fasting, and constant military drills. Our days are governed by the bell, from pre-dawn prayers to exhausted sleep after nightfall. I ask you, in all sincerity, when would we have found the time for the decadent orgies their inquisitors describe? This is a lazy, common smear, a charge leveled against any group that needs to be discredited. It requires no proof, only a willingness to believe the worst of men who live apart from the world. Then, of course, there is the matter of money. They accuse us of fraud, of using our network to enrich the order at the expense of the faithful. This, I confess, is the one accusation that elicits a bitter laugh. They accuse us of greed. This from a king who is at this very moment conducting the largest armed robbery in living memory. The irony is so thick you could forge a sword from it. Our crime was not fraud, it was competence. We created a banking system of unparalleled efficiency and trust. We guarded the wealth of kings and merchants. We made ourselves indispensable. That was our error. In the eyes of a king like Philip, indispensable is simply another word for rival. Our financial success was not a sin against God, but a sin against his ambition. All these charges are built on the foundation of our secrecy. We are the poor fellow soldiers, but we are also the Knights of the Temple. Our chapter meetings were held in secret. Our statutes were not for public view. This was not to hide heresy. It was to maintain discipline, to protect our strategic plans, and to ensure that the vows taken were done with solemnity and without distraction. This secrecy, once our shield, has been reforged into a sword to be used against us. It is the blank canvas on which Philip and Nogaret have painted their masterpiece of horrors. Because no one outside the order truly knows what happens behind our closed doors, they can claim anything happens. Demonic pacts, obscene rites, blasphemous oaths. In the absence of knowledge, fear rushes in to fill the void. The very rules that made us the most effective fighting force in Christendom are now presented as evidence of our corruption. Our discipline is called fanaticism. Our silence is called conspiracy. Our wealth, earned through centuries of pious donations and careful management, is called greed. They have taken every one of our virtues and twisted it into a vice. And who will judge these claims? Not an impartial council, not the Pope, at least not yet, for he is a virtual prisoner of the French crown. No, the investigation will be led by the king's own men, royal agents and Dominican inquisitors who owe their careers to Philip. Their task is not to discover the truth. Their task is to produce confessions. They will use methods that can make any man confess to anything. The rack, the strappado, fire and water. They will break our bodies to make us repeat their lies. They will hold up these forced confessions as proof, and the world, horrified by the tales, will believe them. A good man cannot imagine a king would orchestrate such a monstrous lie, so he must conclude the Templars are monsters. This entire affair is a phantom, a legal fiction conjured from greed and malice. Heresy, idolatry, spitting on the cross. We did no such thing, unless you count accidentally coughing during Mass. The king's men are methodical. They are not a mob. They are a bureaucracy with swords. They have lists, names, every brother, every servant, every preceptory. This night was planned with the cold precision for which our order was once famous. They are dismantling a machine, and to understand why, you must first understand the machine itself. You must understand how we were built, for our design has become our indictment. We were a paradox from our very inception, a creature of two worlds that were never meant to meet. We were monks and we were soldiers. This was the core of our being, the strange and potent alchemy that made us who we were. We took the sacred vows of a monastic life and swore to uphold them on the battlefield. It was a concept so radical, so bizarre, that perhaps it was always destined to be misunderstood. Consider our vows. The first, poverty. An individual knight owned nothing. The armor on his back, the sword in his hand, the very horse he rode, all belonged to the order. This was not mere a gesture, it was a weapon. It forged us into a collective, freeing us from the poison of personal greed and ensuring every ounce of our immense wealth was directed towards a single purpose, the defense of the Holy Land. Then chastity, a vow to remain unmarried, to have no children, to forsake the comforts of a family. To outsiders it seemed unnatural. To us it was a practical necessity. A knight with no wife or children leaves no one to mourn, no dynasty to build, no inheritance to claim. The order was our only family. Our brothers were our only kin. Our loyalty was singular and absolute. And the most crucial vow of all, obedience. Unquestioning, immediate obedience to our superiors. When the commander gave an order, we did not debate, we acted. This is what made our cavalry charges so terrifyingly effective. It was not just courage, it was the discipline of 1,000 men moving as one. In the chaos of battle, our obedience was the rock upon which we built our victories. Imagine this life. You awaken before dawn to pray the office of matins, your voice joining a chorus of chants. An hour later, you're in the training yard, the sound of prayer replaced by the crash of steel on steel. You would hear Mass in your mail hauberk, ready to ride out at a moment's notice. We were men of God who did God's most violent work. We lived with one foot in the cloister and the other in the stirrup. This unique nature required a unique structure. We could not function if we were subject to the whims of every petty baron or ambitious bishop whose lands we passed through. Our mission was international. Our command structure had to be as well. And so, early in our history, Pope Innocent II granted us a privilege that would become both our greatest strength and our most fatal weakness. He issued a papal bull, a decree from the Holy Father himself called Omnidatum Optimum, every perfect gift. And it was a gift indeed. It placed our order under the direct and sole protection of the Pope. We answered to him, and to him alone. No king could command us, no bishop could tax us, no lord could seize our lands. We were a sovereign entity, a spiritual army belonging to all of Christendom, but ruled by none save the Vicar of Christ. This independence was essential for our work. It allowed us to move men and money across borders, to build our network of preceptories from London to Jerusalem, to operate as a single cohesive unit in a fractured and feudal world. We were the iron spine of the Crusades, unbent by local politics. We were, in effect, a law unto ourselves, sanctioned by the highest authority on earth. You can imagine how well this was received by the temporal lords of Europe, kings who were trying to centralize their own power and forge nations looked upon us with deep suspicion. We were a transnational corporation with its own army, its own priests, and its own laws, operating with impunity within their own borders. They smiled at us, borrowed our money, and used our armies, but behind the smiles, resentment festered. This brings us to the heart of the matter, our secrecy. Our chapter meetings, our rituals, our initiations were all conducted in private, behind closed doors. The king's spies now paint this as sinister, as proof that we were hiding some terrible heretical secret. The truth is far more mundane and far more necessary. Why were we so secretive? First and foremost, for military security. Our chapter meetings were councils of war. We discussed the strength of our fortresses, the number of men at our command, the routes of our supply lines, the political situations in the East. To hold such meetings in public would have been strategic suicide. We were at war for 2 centuries. Secrecy was not a choice. It was a condition of survival. Secondly, our initiation was a sacred and solemn affair. It was the moment a man renounced the secular world and dedicated his life and his death to God and the order. It was a profound spiritual commitment, a private vow between a man and his new brotherhood. It was not a public festival or a courtly ceremony. To treat it as such would have been to cheapen its very meaning. And finally, yes, the secrecy helped enforce the discipline that was our hallmark. The mystique of the order, the sense of belonging to an exclusive and dedicated brotherhood, bound us together. It reinforced the chain of command and the vow of absolute obedience. Our silence was a part of our strength. We were defined not by what we said, but by what we did. We were silent, disciplined. Our rituals were private, for a reason. Turns out, private to us meant suspiciously secretive to a king who needed an excuse, and our habit of wearing white just made us easy targets. We built a wall of silence around ourselves to protect our mission, and now that the mission is gone, that same wall has become our prison. Our secrecy created a vacuum, and King Philip, being a man who abhors any power he does not control, has rushed to fill that vacuum with his own poisonous fictions. Because no one outside the order truly knows what we do, he can claim we do anything. Worship cats, deny Christ, engage in obscene rites. The less people know, the more they are willing to believe. So the very qualities that made us the elite fighting force of Christendom have been twisted into the articles of our condemnation. Our spiritual devotion has been branded as heresy. Our military discipline is now seen as proof of a secret conspiracy. Our papal independence is framed as arrogant defiance of royal authority. Our wealth, held in common for the good of the mission, is called personal greed. The machine that was designed to fight a holy war in a foreign land was never meant to operate in the intricate, venomous world of European court politics. We were built for the desert, for the straightforward brutality of siege and battle. We were not prepared for a war of whispers, of lawyers, of slander. We were lions, and we have been brought down by snakes. Our Grand Master answers to the Pope. But what happens when the Pope himself is a virtual prisoner, a man who owes his papal tiara to the King of France? Our independent command structure, our greatest shield, has been rendered useless. There is no one to appeal to. The supreme authority we answered to is compromised. We are truly, utterly alone. This is the grim irony of our fate. We are being destroyed not in spite of our strengths, but because of them. Our unique status, our self-reliance, our silence, these were the pillars of our order. Now they are the clubs being used to beat us to death. The king's men portray us as a state within a state, a secret society with too much power, and perhaps in their eyes we were. We never sought earthly power. We sought to serve a heavenly king. But in doing so, we created an organization that threatened the earthly kings who surrounded us. We built our house on the rock of papal authority, never imagining that the rock itself could be moved by a French monarch's ambition. And so the machine grinds to a halt. The gears are being broken, the parts scattered. The king's men are efficient. They are using our own discipline against us. They know that if they arrest one of us, he will not speak. But they also know that under enough pain, any man will say anything. Our silence protects our brothers, but their torture will condemn them. The great and secret order of the Knights Templar is being laid bare not by revelation, but by invention. The world will now be told a fantastic story of our secret lives, a story written in the king's dungeons. Help us understand these perplexing new definitions of secret.
The stone floor is unforgivingly cold. Outside this cell I hear the sounds of an order collapsing, not with the roar of a collapsing fortress wall, but with the quiet, chilling scrape of shackles and the murmur of names being read from a list. It all happened this morning, in the dark. It feels like a lifetime ago, but it was only hours. This is how the world ends, not with a bang, but with a knock at the door before dawn. It was the hour of matins. The air in the chapel was still and cold, carrying the familiar scent of old stone and beeswax. The chanting was a low rumble, a timeless sound that has measured the knights of our order for centuries. It was a Friday, the 13th day of October, in the year of our Lord 1307. A date of no consequence, a day like any other, or so we thought. We had heard the whispers, of course, rumors from the court, tales of the king's displeasure, of his endless need for coin. But we gave them little heed. We were the Knights Templar. We had faced down the armies of sultans and weathered the desert sun. What were we to fear from the whispers of courtiers? We were secure, perhaps too secure. Our faith was in our history, in our papal charters, in the very stones of our preceptories. We had grown complacent. The first sign was a sound that did not belong. The gentle rhythm of the liturgy was broken by a sharp, percussive bang on the main oak door. Not the polite rap of a traveler seeking shelter, but the hard, insistent fist of authority. A few heads turned. The chanting faltered for a moment, before resuming, a little weaker than before. Another bang, louder this time. An order. The commander motioned for the door to be opened. We expected a royal messenger with an urgent dispatch, perhaps. What we saw instead was the local seneschal, the king's chief officer in the district. He was not alone. Behind him stood a dozen men-at-arms, their steel caps glinting in the torchlight, their faces grim and unreadable. They did not ask for entry. They strode in. The seneschal held up a parchment scroll, its red wax seal bearing the fleur-de-lis of France.
His voice, devoid of all emotion, cut through the sacred silence of our chapel. He read from the document, a warrant for the arrest of every Templar brother present, issued by order of His Royal Majesty King Philip IV, and sanctioned by the Grand Inquisitor of France. The charges were read aloud, a torrent of vile nonsense, heresy, idolatry, denying Christ, worshipping a demonic head. It was a cascade of insanity, so divorced from our reality that for a moment we could only stare in stunned silence. There was no anger, not yet, only a profound, bottomless confusion. It was as if we had been accused of flying to the moon. And what did we do, the fearsome Knights Templar? Did we draw our swords? Did we fight back against this intrusion? No. We did nothing. We were soldiers, yes, but we were soldiers of Christ and of Christendom. The order came from the King of France, a Christian king. The warrant bore the seal of the Inquisition, the arm of the Church itself. To resist would have been to declare ourselves rebels and outlaws, to prove them right. So we stood, silent and motionless, as the shackles were brought forth. The dawn, a knock, not for bread or a blessing, for shackles. It was a perfectly executed plan by the king, who owed us money. Coincidence? I think not. The sheer chilling efficiency of it all began to sink in as they led us from the chapel into the courtyard. This was not a local matter. This was bigger. As the sun began to cast a weak gray light over the land, the terrible truth of the operation revealed itself. This was not just happening to us in our small commandery. At this exact hour, on this same morning, the scene was being repeated all across the Kingdom of France. In every city, in every town, at every remote farm and outpost where the white mantle of the temple was flown. From the Grand Paris Temple, the heart of our order, where our own Grand Master, the noble Jacques de Molay, was taken from his bed, to the bustling port of La Rochelle, to the vineyards of Provence, to the forests of Gascony. Thousands of us, arrested in a single, silent, brutally efficient sweep. It was a net cast over the entire kingdom in the dead of night, and we had awoken to find ourselves entangled in its cords. This was the masterwork of Guillaume de Nogaret, a logistical masterpiece of betrayal. For weeks, his secret orders had traveled by rider to every royal official in the realm with strict instructions that they were not to be unsealed until the appointed hour. He had used the king's own administrative network to orchestrate the downfall of the king's own bankers. They took everyone. Not just the knights with our white mantles. They took the sergeants in their brown habits, the priests who said our masses, the stewards who managed our lands, even the stable hands and blacksmiths who served us. No one associated with the temple was to be spared. The order was to be decapitated, dismembered, and dissolved in a single stroke. And as they shackled the men, other officials moved in with ledgers and inkwells, vultures in clerk's clothing. They began a meticulous inventory of everything. Every sword in the armory, every chalice in the chapel, every sack of grain in the storehouse, every coin in the treasury, especially the coins. This was never just about heresy. It was about assets. It was the most audacious act of corporate raiding in history. The final, bitterest irony: just days ago, our Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was in Paris as an honored guest of the king. He had served as a pallbearer at the funeral for Philip's sister-in-law. He stood beside the king, a symbol of the friendship and trust between the crown and the temple. That trust was a lie. The king's smile was the smile of a spider lulling a fly. The surprise was total. We were an army, and we were caught asleep in our beds. We were financiers, and our assets were frozen and seized without warning. We were a holy order, and we were branded heretics by the very institutions we were sworn to defend. There was no escape. There was no warning. One moment we were a pillar of Christendom. The next we were prisoners of the state. This day, this Friday the 13th, will forever be a cursed date. A day a Christian king betrayed his most faithful soldiers for gold. A day when law was used to perpetrate a crime, and faith was used to justify greed. They have arrested our bodies, but they cannot arrest the truth, not if it is remembered. The efficiency of it all was something to behold. I say this without admiration, but with a kind of grim professional respect. As a military man, I can appreciate a well-executed plan, and this was flawless. The secrecy, the coordination, the speed. It was an ambush on a national scale. It was a dagger in the back, slid perfectly between the ribs. They marched us out of our homes, places we had built with our own hands, and into a new world of suspicion and fear. The local villagers, who had known us for generations as their patrons and protectors, simply stared, their faces a mixture of confusion and terror. What could they do? The king's banner flew over the men who held our chains. This is the anatomy of a perfect betrayal. It requires absolute power, a complete lack of scruples, a plausible lie, and above all, perfect timing. Philip and Nogaret had all four. They used the cloak of piety to hide the heart of a thief and the machinery of the state to carry out their crime. And so we sit in chains, listening to the echoes of their victory. We, who faced the Mamluks, have been undone by accountants and lawyers. We, who survived the deserts of Syria, have been captured in the heart of France. The completeness of our ruin is staggering. It is a testament to the fact that the most dangerous enemy is not the one you face on the battlefield, but the one who calls you friend. This story, the tale of this one dreadful morning, should not be forgotten. It is a warning. It is a testament. The efficiency of this betrayal is a dark marvel, a lesson in the mechanics.
They have taken Brother Arnaud. I heard them come for him an hour ago. I hear him now. His screams are not loud yet. They are the initial, sharp cries of surprise and pain before the mind builds a wall against it. Soon that wall will crumble, and the sounds will become something else entirely, something less than human. This is the next stage of the king's great enterprise. The arrests were the body. This is the soul, or rather the breaking of it. After the silence of the cell, the torture chamber is a place of terrible industry. It is not a place of rage or passion. It is a workshop. The men who work there are not monsters in the theatrical sense. They are craftsmen. Their craft is pain. They approach their work with the detached professionalism of a butcher or a tanner. They have a task to complete, to render a human will into a malleable substance so it can be reshaped into a confession. They begin with a nauseating display of false piety. An inquisitor, often a Dominican friar with soft hands and a placid face, will explain the situation calmly. He will tell you that your guilt is already known to God and to the Holy Office. He will say that this procedure is not a punishment, but an act of mercy, a final chance to unburden your soul, to confess your sins, and perhaps save yourself from the fires of hell. The pain, he explains, is merely a tool to help you find the truth you are hiding. It is the most profound lie of all, the one that underpins everything that follows. They are not seeking the truth. The truth is irrelevant in this room. The truth is, in fact, an obstacle. They have a script, a story written by Nogaret and the king, and your role is simply to recite your lines. If you refuse, they will use their instruments to help you remember the words. Let me tell you of these instruments. They are ingenious in their simplicity. There is the rack, a simple wooden frame. They lay you upon it, strap your wrists and ankles, and begin to turn a wheel. At first, it is just a dull, uncomfortable stretching. Then you hear a series of small, wet pops as your cartilages tear. Then comes the fire in your joints as your shoulders and hips are slowly, methodically pulled out of their sockets. All the while, the Inquisitor asks his questions in a calm, patient voice. Did you deny him? Did you spit upon his cross? Then there is the strappado, a personal favorite of many of these artisans. They tie your hands behind your back and hoist you into the air by your wrists. The pain in your shoulders is immediate, a white-hot agony as they dislocate. They might tie weights to your feet to increase the effect. They will let you hang there, a grotesque parody of a crucifixion, until you either faint or confess. And if you faint, they will revive you so the questioning can continue. A particularly inventive method involves fire. They will strap you to a chair, and a brazier of hot coals will be brought close. They will take lard or some other grease and rub it generously on the soles of your feet. Then they will push your feet towards the flame. The idea is to roast them slowly. The smell of your own burning flesh is a powerful inducement to talk. It is a smell you never forget. The racks, the fire, the boots, they have a remarkable way of making you confess to anything. I confessed to riding a broomstick with a goat. My brother confessed to being a talking squirrel. Very convincing, this justice. One of my sergeants, a simple man named Thomas, who could barely count to 20, was made to confess that he had masterminded a complex scheme to defraud the royal treasury. They held a hot iron to his side until he agreed he was a financial genius. You see, innocence is not a shield here. It is a hindrance. A guilty man might confess quickly to the crimes he actually committed. An innocent man has nothing to say. He can only deny. And denial is seen as proof of a hardened, stubborn soul, one that requires ever more vigorous persuasion. The more you insist on your innocence, the more they hurt you, because your refusal to confess is evidence of your profound guilt. It is a perfect closed circle of logic, and you are trapped in its center. There comes a point for every man when the body betrays the mind. It is not a matter of courage or faith. A man can endure much for his beliefs, but the flesh has its limits. There is a moment when the pain is no longer an external sensation. It becomes your entire world. It blots out the sun. It silences God. It erases your own name. All that exists is the fire in your joints or the burning of your skin. In that moment, the desire for the pain to stop becomes the single most powerful force in the universe. It is a craving more potent than hunger, more urgent than thirst. You would do anything, say anything, sign anything. You would confess to murdering your own mother, to poisoning the wells, to causing the sun to rise in the west, if only it would make them stop. And all the while, a scribe sits in the corner, his quill poised over a fresh sheet of parchment. He is the quietest man in the room, but the most important. He is the one who transforms your screams into a legal document. The Inquisitor will ask a leading question, and you worshipped this head, this Baphomet, and you through a fog of agony will croak, "Yes." The scribe's quill will scratch. And you spit on the cross. A sob, a nod, "Yes." Scratch, scratch. They do not ask you to invent the story. They have the story already written. They simply need you to lend it your voice, or what is left of it. They feed you the lies, and your broken body parrots them back. You become a puppet, and your tormentor is the ventriloquist. Your mouth moves, but the words are his. After it is over, after you have agreed to every fantastic accusation, a strange calm descends. The pain stops. They might give you a sip of water. They might even have a physician tend to your grievous wounds. The craftsmen are done with their work for the day. Their tone becomes almost gentle. They have what they came for. Then comes the final violation. The scribe brings the parchment to you. It is your confession, a long list of heresies and blasphemies, all written in neat and clear script. And at the bottom, they place the quill in your broken, trembling hand and guide your fingers to sign your name, to affirm for all the world to see that these lies are your truth. That is the moment your soul breaks. They carry you back to your cell. You are no longer the same man that left it. You are a thing that has been unmade and poorly reassembled. And then you must lie here in the dark, listening to them drag the next man out. You hear the distant, muffled screams begin, and you know, with a chilling certainty, exactly what is happening. You know every step of the dance. The king's dungeons are not places of justice. They are factories. They take innocent men as their raw material, and through the alchemy of torture, they produce signed confessions. These confessions are the only product that matters. These signed and sealed lies will be presented to the world as evidence, and the world will believe them. The torture remains the secret. The confession becomes the history. I can hear Arnaud's voice clearly now. He is no longer screaming words. It is just a sound, a long, keening howl of pure, undiluted agony. He was a good man, a brave knight who fought at my side at Acre. He loved God with a simple, honest heart, and they are turning him into a monster on a piece of paper. This is the true nature of the king's war against us. It is not a trial. It is a manufacturing process. They are creating an army of paper demons, each one with a Templar's name signed at the bottom. Do not let these screams be the final word. Do not let these forced confessions be our epitaph. Our bodies are broken, but our story must.
The screams from the torture chambers have a new resonance now. Before, they were the product of a king's greed, an act of secular tyranny. But things have changed. A new seal has been affixed to our damnation, a new authority invoked. The king's men still wield the hot irons, but now they do so with the blessing of the Holy Father himself. And that, my brothers, is the cruelest torture of all. In the first days of this nightmare, our only comfort, our only hope, was the Pope. We clung to the knowledge that King Philip's actions were a brazen crime, not just against us, but against the authority of the Holy See. We were the Pope's special soldiers, answerable to him alone.
We imagined his fury, his righteous indignation. We awaited the papal bull that would condemn the king, demand our release, and restore justice. We were fools. We forgot who this pope was. Not a titan like Gregory or a formidable lawyer like Boniface. This was Clement V, a Frenchman named Bertrand de Gaulle, a man who, since his election in 1305, had refused to travel to Rome. He preferred the comforts of his homeland, setting up his court first in Bordeaux, then Poitiers, then Avignon. He was the Holy Father, but he lived in the shadow of the French king, a shepherd residing in the wolf's den. He was a man plagued by ill health and, it would seem, a chronic weakness of the will. He was a politician where a saint was needed, a negotiator where a warrior was required. He owed his very election to Philip's influence, a debt the king was now calling due. He was a man caught in a gilded cage, and Philip held the key. Our fate, we now realize, was sealed the moment a Frenchman was placed on the throne of St. Peter. When news of the dawn arrests reached him, Clement was, by all accounts, genuinely shocked. He was outraged. This was a flagrant usurpation of his authority. The Templars were his responsibility. He protested. He wrote angry letters. He made demands. For a brief, shining moment, it seemed our faith was well placed. The shepherd was rousing himself to protect his flock. But King Philip is a master of pressure. He did not simply request the Pope's cooperation. He presented him with a threat of such magnitude it could have shattered the Church. Philip threatened to proceed with a posthumous trial of Pope Boniface VIII, Clement's predecessor, on charges of heresy. To have a pope officially declared a heretic would be a scandal from which the papacy might never recover. It was blackmail of the highest, most cynical order. And so Clement began to yield. The first crack in the dam appeared in a papal bull called Pastoralis Praeeminentiae. With this decree, issued in November of 1307, the Pope ordered all the monarchs of Christendom to arrest the Templars within their own realms and seize their property in the name of the Church. He legitimized Philip's crime and made it the law for all Christian lands. He had not yet condemned us, but he had thrown us in chains. His strategy, it seems, was of appeasement. He sought to take control of the process, insisting that the trials be conducted by the Church, not by the king's agents. For a moment, a second flicker of hope. A church trial would be fairer, surely. The Pope would appoint his own inquisitors. He would get to the bottom of this. We thought it was a move to save us. In truth, it was a move to save himself. And he knew. By God, he knew the truth. In the summer of 1308, a papal commission was sent to the castle of Chinon, where our Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, and other leaders of the order were being held. They were away from Philippe's torturers. Before the Pope's own cardinals, they retracted their confessions. They explained in detail the agonies that had forced them to lie. And what did the cardinals do? They granted our leaders absolution. They absolved them of the sin of heresy, formally reconciling them with the Church. A document was drawn up, the Chinon parchment, a record of this event. The Pope knew our confessions were false. He had proof. He held in his hands the instrument of our salvation. And he did nothing with it. He buried it. The pressure from Philip was relentless.
The king had the confessions wrung from my brothers by fire and the rack, and he published them for all to see. He orchestrated a masterful campaign of propaganda, painting us as monsters. He stirred up the public and the university masters against us, creating a wave of hysteria that Clement was too weak to stand against. The matter was to be settled at a great church council, convened in the city of Vienne in 1311. The Pope had summoned bishops and cardinals from across the world to decide the fate of our order. He had even, in a moment of courage, invited the Templars to come and present their own defense. Hundreds of my brothers answered the call, ready to testify. But Philip had one last move to play. When the council convened, he arrived not as a penitent son of the Church, but as a conqueror. He brought with him a great host of armed men who surrounded the town. It was not a negotiation, it was an intimidation. The message was clear: you will do as I say, or my army will find a way to persuade you. The shepherd was now surrounded by the wolf's entire pack. And so came the final, gut-wrenching betrayal. On the 3rd of April, in the year 1312, Pope Clement V stood before the council and issued the bull that sealed our doom. It was called Vox in excelso, which means a voice from on high. But the voice was not God's. It was King Philip's, speaking through the mouth of a terrified pope. The document is a masterpiece of cowardice, a marvel of legalistic evasion. It states for the record that the Pope cannot, based on the evidence, formally find the Order of the Temple guilty of the crime of heresy. He admits the case is not proven. But, he continues, because of the scandal, because of the suspicion, because of the infamy that has attached itself to the order, it is no longer fit for purpose. He did not condemn us for being heretics. He condemned us for being accused of heresy. He did not sentence us for our sins, but for the good of the Church's reputation. We were not found guilty. We were simply dissolved, suppressed, erased by administrative decree. After centuries of service, we were being made redundant for political convenience. The Pope, our Holy Father, he was supposed to protect us. Instead, he bowed to the king. The shepherd abandoning his flock to the wolves, a truly painful betrayal from the very top. He had the proof of our innocence from Chinon, but he lacked the spine to use it. He chose the path of least resistance, sacrificing his loyal soldiers to appease a tyrant and prevent a schism. And what of our wealth? The true object of this whole affair? The papal bull decreed that all Templar property should be transferred to our rivals, the Knights Hospitaller. But Philip, ever the cunning administrator, ensured the crown would be generously compensated for his pains in managing the affair. He took his pound of flesh, and then some. He got his money. I often wonder what Clement thinks when he is alone at night. Does he see the faces of the men he condemned? Does he hear the screams from the dungeons he sanctioned? Or does he simply count the political cost and congratulate himself on navigating a difficult crisis? Does a man who commits such a profound betrayal even have the capacity for remorse? The cross we wear on our mantles was a gift from Pope Eugenius III, a symbol of our willingness to shed our blood for Christ. Now the successor of Eugenius, the vicar of Christ on earth, has turned that same cross into
The physical chains are the least of our bindings. A man can grow accustomed to the weight of iron on his wrists. The chains that truly bind us are invisible, forged from whispers, rumors, and sermons. They are the chains of public opinion, and they were wrapped around us long before the king's men ever broke down our doors. What you are witnessing is not just an arrest, it is the final act of a magnificent and terrible public spectacle. The king and his creature, Nogaret, understood a simple truth. To rob a man of his property, you must first rob him of his good name. To destroy an order of knights, you must first convince the world they are an army of demons. And so they unleashed a war not of swords, but of words. A propaganda campaign so vast and so vicious it has poisoned the very air we once breathed. At first, we believed the people would see through it. We were the Templars. For generations we were the heroes in the songs of the minstrels, the pious soldiers who held the line against the infidel. The common folk had looked to us for protection, for charity, for the steadfast example of Christian chivalry. We could not fathom that they would believe these grotesque fantasies, but we underestimated the power of fear and the effectiveness of a well-orchestrated lie. The campaign began in the one place we could not defend ourselves, the pulpits of France. The king's ministers sent out instructions to the clergy. On a coordinated Sunday, priests across the kingdom delivered sermons of fire and brimstone, denouncing us from the altar. Imagine the scene. A farmer sitting in the same pew his grandfather sat in, listening to the priest he has known since birth. And this priest, this trusted voice of God in his community, tells him that the knights in the nearby preceptory, the men he has seen pray in this very church, are agents of Satan. What is a simple man to believe? The word of his priest or the evidence of his own eyes? The sermon is a powerful weapon. It plants a seed of doubt and terror in the most fertile soil there is, the soul of the faithful. They painted lurid pictures with their words. They spoke of secret rites in the dead of night, of trampled crucifixes, of demonic idols hidden in our vaults. They transformed our preceptories from houses of God into covens of witches in the popular imagination. Then came the confessions. Our confessions, the words of my brothers, spoken under the agony of the rack and the flame, were hastily copied by scribes and distributed throughout the kingdom. They were read aloud in town squares, in university halls, in the courts of nobles. They were presented as absolute, undeniable proof of our guilt. Look, the king's men would say, they admit it themselves. No one, of course, mentioned the methods used to obtain these admissions. No one spoke of the dislocated shoulders, the roasted feet, the broken spirits. The torture was the secret ingredient. The confession was the finished meal served up for public consumption. To hear the words of a man you have known and respected for 20 years, a man whose courage you have witnessed in battle, now admitting to the most absurd and vile acts, it is a disorienting, soul-crushing thing. The spectacle was not confined to words. They made our humiliation a public performance. When they moved us from one prison to another, they would parade us through the streets in carts, so the public could line the roads to jeer and throw filth at us. They would force us to attend these public sermons, to stand in chains and listen to ourselves being condemned as monsters. The goal was to strip us of our humanity, to sever any lingering bond of sympathy the people might feel for us. And they sought the stamp of intellectual approval. King Philip pressured the masters of theology at the great University of Paris to issue a judgment on the matter. These learned men, with their fine robes and their endless debates on the nature of angels, were presented with the forced confessions.
Under the watchful eye of the king's agents, they dutifully produced a scholarly opinion confirming that the acts confessed to were indeed heretical and worthy of the harshest punishment. The king now had God, the people, and the academics on his side, a powerful trinity. They preyed upon existing jealousies. We were wealthy, we were proud, we answered to no man but the Pope. It was easy for them to whisper to the local merchant, "The Templars' exemption from taxes hurts your business." To the local lord, "The Templars' fortress on your land is an insult to your authority." To the peasant, "The Templars' riches could feed your family for a year." They turned our success into a sin, and our independence into arrogance. They preached against us, printed pamphlets, painted lurid pictures of our satanic rituals. It's amazing how quickly a loyal defender of the faith can become a spawn of hell if the king needs your gold badly enough. The lie, it seems, travels much faster than the truth. A lie is a thrilling story of monsters and demons. The truth is a complicated tale of debt, politics, and the king's ruthless ambition. Which do you think the people prefer to hear? So now the transformation is complete. We are no longer Brother Gilbert or Brother Arnaud. We are the heretics, the devil-worshippers. The men who once represented the ideal of Christian knighthood are now a byword for blasphemy and corruption. The white mantle, once a symbol of our purity, is now seen as the cloak of a hypocrite. This propaganda was the necessary acid to dissolve the bonds of loyalty and respect that held our order together and protected it within society. It was designed to isolate us completely, to ensure that no one, not even the Pope in the end, would have the political courage to come to our aid. How can you defend a man when the entire world has been convinced he dines with the devil? It created a climate in which a fair trial is an impossibility. The verdict was delivered in the court of public opinion long before we ever saw the inside of a courtroom. Every judge, every bishop, every cardinal who sits in judgment over us is aware of the public hysteria. They know what the king wants. They know what the people have been led to believe. To find us innocent would be to defy the entire kingdom. I have seen the look in the eyes of my jailers. A month ago it was a look of professional indifference. Now it is a look of fear and revulsion. They see me and they cross themselves. They leave my food by the door and retreat quickly, as if my very presence might contaminate them. They believe the stories. They believe I am damned. That is the true power of Philip's war. He has not just imprisoned our bodies, he has damned our souls in the eyes of the world. And I wonder, what will be the life of these lies? Will they die with us? Or will the tale of the monstrous, devil-worshipping Templars become a story told for centuries? Will children huddle by the fire and listen to tales of our secret idol Baphomet and our blasphemous rites? A lie, once it takes root, can grow into a mighty tree that casts a shadow over generations. The king needed to create a monster worthy of his persecution. He could not simply say, "I am seizing the assets of my bankers because I am in debt." He had to say, "I am cleansing the kingdom of a vile heresy that threatens the very foundations of Christendom." The first is a crime, the second is a holy duty. The propaganda was the act of transubstantiation that turned a base metal crime into a golden crusade. And so we are left here, trapped not only by stone walls, but by a story, a fiction so powerful it has become the truth for everyone on the outside. They have successfully managed the public spectacle. We have been tried and convicted by rumor and sermon. All that is left now is the formality of the sentence. They say that the pen is mightier than the sword.
I never truly understood what that meant until now. Our swords won us battles and carved out kingdoms, but the quills of the king's scribes and the tongues of his priests have defeated us more completely than any Saracen army ever could. They have slain our reputation, the very essence of our honor. This campaign of lies is not unique to our time. It is a timeless weapon of tyrants. Understand how it works. See the mechanisms of fear and slander. Support our ongoing propaganda analysis. Subscribe now. Help us dissect the lies so that when the next king decides to create the next monster, you will have the wisdom to see it for what it is.
The end is drawing near. I can feel it in the air, in the way the guards walk, in the finality of the sounds from the courtyard. But before the silence falls, there is one last story that must be told. It is the story of our leader, our Grand Master, Jacques de Molay. It is the story of how an old man, broken and shamed, found the strength to stand up one last time and reclaim his honor even at the cost of his life. Jacques de Molay was not a brilliant scholar or a cunning politician. He was a soldier, a veteran of the wars in the East, a man who had dedicated his entire life to the order. He was simple in his faith, steadfast in his duty. He was our Grand Master, the living embodiment of the Temple. And for that reason, his confession was the prize King Philip coveted above all others. When they arrested him in the Paris Temple, he was an old man, nearly 70 years of age. He had been a guest at the king's court, a respected figure. The shock of the betrayal, the suddenness of the accusations must have been a heavy blow, and then they took him to their chambers of pain. They took this old warrior, this veteran of real battles, and they subjected him to the methodical, soulless torments of the Inquisition. And he broke, as any man would break. He confessed. He signed his name to their lies, admitting to the grotesque charges they had invented. His confession was the keystone in their arch of calumny. With the Grand Master's admission of guilt, the case against the rest of us was sealed. He had been failed by his king, and in the depths of agony he had failed his order. The shame must have been a heavier burden than any chains. For 7 years he languished in the king's dungeons, 7 years to reflect on his moment of weakness, to live with the lie he had been forced to tell. The king's great trial dragged on, a slow, grinding process designed to legitimize the initial crime. The Pope, our weak-willed Clement, had suppressed the order. The assets were seized. The king had won. All that remained was the final sentencing of the leaders. But during those long years, a spark of defiance had been kindled. There was a moment at the castle of Chinon when de Molay and other leaders were questioned by the Pope's own men, away from the king's torturers. There they found their courage. They recanted their confessions, explaining the duress under which they had been given. They proclaimed the innocence of the order. The Pope's commission granted them absolution, but the Pope himself, fearing Philip, buried the report. Others had also tried to fight back. In 1310, dozens of my brothers who had volunteered to speak in the order's defense were declared relapsed heretics by Philip's hand-picked archbishop. They were burned at the stake in a field outside Paris, their screams a stark warning to any other knight who thought of retracting his confession. The price of telling the truth, we learned, was fire. De Molay knew this. He knew the cost of defiance. The final scene was set for the 18th of March in the year 1314. A great scaffold was erected on the Parvis, the square in front of the Cathedral of Notre Dame. The great and the good of Paris were assembled. It was to be the grand finale of the king's 7-year spectacle. De Molay, alongside Geoffrey de Charnay, our preceptor of Normandy, and 2 other leaders were brought forth to hear their fate. They were ghosts of their former selves, old, frail men, emaciated and pale from years of darkness and despair. The king's cardinals read the sentence. In light of their full confessions, they were being shown mercy. They were condemned not to the stake, but to perpetual imprisonment, life in a dungeon. The trial was over. The king had his victory, and the leaders of the temple would conveniently disappear from the world. And in that moment, something shifted. As the cardinals finished speaking, Jacques de Molay found his voice. It was not the voice of a broken prisoner, but the voice of a grand master. He spoke out, his words ringing across the silent square. He declared that he was indeed a sinner, but not in the way the court believed. His sin, he cried, was to have lied, to have betrayed his order and his God to save his own life from the agony of torture. He proclaimed for all to hear that the order of the Templars was pure and holy, that the charges were a fiction, and his confession a product of pain and fear. As the crowd and the cardinals stared in stunned disbelief, Geoffrey de Charnay stood beside him, shouting his own agreement, his own retraction, his own defiance. They had seized their final moment, not to beg for mercy, but to reclaim the truth. Our Grand Master, noble Jacques de Molay, he confessed, then he retracted. Brave man. Foolish, perhaps, but honorable. His words will sting the king's conscience, if kings have consciences. He had just turned a carefully managed show trial into a public relations disaster for the crown. King Philip, who was likely watching from the palace nearby, was incandescent with rage. This was an act of public rebellion he could not tolerate. The 2 men had confessed, and now they recanted. In the twisted logic of the Inquisition, that made them relapsed heretics, a crime for which there was only one punishment. Bypassing the authority of the stunned cardinals, the king himself gave the order. They were to be burned that very evening. There was no new trial, no appeal. Just the swift, brutal command of an enraged monarch. They were taken to a small island in the river Seine, the Ile du Juif. A pyre had been hastily assembled. As the sun set behind the towers of Paris, they were led to the stake. Witnesses to the event said that de Molay showed no fear. He asked that his hands be left untied so that he could face his death in a posture of prayer. He asked to be turned to face the Cathedral of Notre Dame. As the executioners lit the wood, his voice rose one last time, proclaiming his innocence and the innocence of the order, until the smoke and flames finally silenced him. Legend says that with his dying breath he summoned King Philip and Clement V to appear with him before the judgment of God within a year. A fine story. I do not know if it is true. What I do know is that Pope Clement was dead within a month, and King Philip himself suffered a fatal accident while hunting before the year was out. Coincidence, perhaps. Or perhaps God's court is simply more efficient than those of men. That final act of defiance did not save the order. It was already gone. But it saved something far more important, its honor. De Molay could have accepted a quiet life in prison. He chose a painful death to set the record straight. He ensured that the final word on the Knights Templars was not a forced confession, but a martyr's cry of innocence. He died as he had lived, a soldier of Christ. In his final moments, he demonstrated the courage that his torturers had temporarily stolen from him. He showed the world that you can break a man's body, you can force him to speak lies, but you cannot extinguish the fire in his soul unless he allows you to. And so, the news of his death has come to us here in the darkness. It is a terrible grief, but it is also a strange and powerful inspiration. He has shown us the way. He has taught us that even in the face of absolute defeat, there is a final victory to be won, the victory of dying for the truth. His defiance is the last chapter in our story. It is a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit against the crushing weight of tyranny. It is a story that should be shouted from the rooftops, a final defiant cry against the dying of the light. If you have been moved by this old soldier's courage, if you believe that a noble end can redeem a life of suffering, then stand with his memory. If you're enjoying this defiant last stand, please subscribe for more. Help us ensure that the tale of Jacques de Molay's martyrdom echoes forever, a final rebuke to the kings and popes who betrayed him.
The sounds of the dungeon have changed. The screams of the tortured have faded, replaced by something quieter, yet infinitely more dreadful. It is the sound of resignation, the sound of men contemplating their end. For many of my brothers, the questioning is over, the confessions have been made, and then, in a final act of courage, unmade. And for that, there is only one final answer the king and his churchmen will accept: the fire. There is a particular genius to the trap they have laid for us, a legal and theological cage from which there is no escape. It is the charge of being a relapsed heretic. The logic is as simple as it is diabolical. First, they torture you until you confess to being a heretic. At that point, you are a sinner, but one who can be welcomed back into the fold of the church with penance, usually a life sentence in a dungeon. Your confession is recorded, and you are officially guilty. But what if after months or years in the dark, your conscience gnaws at you? What if you cannot live with the lie you told? What if you find the courage to stand before their tribunals and speak the truth? That you are innocent, that the order is innocent, that your confession was a product of unbearable agony. In that moment, you have relapsed back into your heresy. You have rejected the truth you confess to, and for a relapsed heretic, there is no mercy, there is only the stake. It is a perfect system. To maintain your innocence is to be tortured until you confess. To confess and then recant is to be burned alive. The only path to survival is to live out your days upholding a lie that damns you and all your brothers. They have made the truth a capital crime. And the Church, in its infinite wisdom, keeps its hands clean. Ecclesia abhorret a sangue. The Church abhors the shedding of blood. A fine sentiment. So when a man is condemned to death, the clerical judges simply hand him over to the secular arm, the king's men, for the sentence to be carried out. It is a pious washing of the hands, a liturgical loophole that allows them to condemn a man to the most horrific of deaths while maintaining a veneer of mercy. The first great lesson in this new justice came in the year 1310. Dozens of my brothers, imprisoned in Paris, had found their courage.
They were mounting a defense. They were speaking to the papal commissions, retracting their tortured confessions, and systematically dismantling the lies of the prosecution. For a brief moment, it seemed the truth might actually prevail. The king and his puppets grew nervous. The response was swift and brutal. Philip appointed one of his creatures, Philippe de Marigny, as the new Archbishop of Sens, the diocese that had jurisdiction over Paris. Marigny wasted no time. He convened the local council, bypassed the larger papal inquiry, and summarily declared 54 of these defending Templars to be relapsed heretics. On the 12th of May in that year, those 54 knights were taken to a field near the Porte Saint-Antoine. Carts were filled with wood, stakes were driven into the earth. The men were tied to them. They were knights who had offered to defend the order's honor, and for that they were to be burned alive in a single horrific spectacle of state terror. Accounts from those who witnessed it say my brothers met their end with a courage that stunned the crowd. They refused to recant their retractions. They endured the flames, calling out the name of Christ until the smoke and fire consumed them. They died as martyrs. Their deaths served the king's purpose. The organized defense of the order collapsed overnight. Who else would dare speak up, knowing that the price was the pyre? The flames. So many of my brothers, dying for a lie, dying for their innocence, dying because a king needed gold. A very warm reception indeed, a fiery embrace from justice. It is a death of unimaginable horror, a death designed to be a public spectacle. The authorities announce the burning in advance. The crowds gather as if for a fair. Merchants sell refreshments. It is a day's entertainment. They lead the condemned man out. He is often dressed in a simple tunic, perhaps with a placard detailing his crimes hung around his neck. The priests chant psalms. The condemned is given one last chance to confess and live. To refuse is to choose the fire. He is tied to the stake, the wood piled high around his legs, and then a torch is set to the kindling. They say the smoke often chokes a man before the flames reach him. I pray that it is so. The heat must be unbearable, the pain beyond all human comprehension. To die by the sword in the heat of battle, that is a death a warrior understands. It is quick, and there is honor in it. But this is a slow, agonizing erasure. It is a death designed to inspire terror in all who watch it. And for what? For speaking the truth, for refusing to live a lie. These men, my brothers, were warriors of God. They expected to meet their Maker, certainly, but they expected to do so on a dusty battlefield in the Holy Land, their sword in hand, a Saracen's blade in their gut. Not here, in their own homeland, condemned as enemies of the faith they had dedicated their lives to defending. There is a dark, twisted theology at work here. Fire, they say, purifies. By burning the body of the heretic, they are giving his soul a final violent chance at salvation. It is a theology invented by men who enjoy the smell of burning flesh and the sight of a crowd silenced by horror. By their logic, we Templars must be the purest souls in all Christendom, so thoroughly have we been cleansed. But this is not about salvation. It is about communication. Every pyre is a message from the King. Every scream is a sermon. The message is simple. Defy me, and you will be erased. Your body will be turned to ash. Your property will be mine, and your name will be a curse for all time. It is the ultimate act of power, not just to kill a man, but to rewrite his very existence into a cautionary tale.
And yet, in this horror, there is a strange and terrible glory. By choosing the stake over the lie, these men have made their final stand. They have refused to be pawns in the king's game. They could have lived, rotting in a dungeon, their name forever attached to a false confession. Instead, they chose to die, their final act a defiant scream of innocence. Who is the true martyr? The man who dies for his faith at the hands of a pagan, or the man who dies for his faith at the hands of his own church? I would argue the latter requires a courage that is almost unimaginable. It is a death stripped of all glory, all comfort, all assurance. It is a leap into the fire, armed with nothing but the truth in your own heart. The execution of our Grand Master was the final act of this fiery drama. He too was a relapsed heretic. He too chose the flame over the lie. His death was the exclamation point at the end of this long, bloody sentence. It has shown all of us who remain what is expected of us. It has shown us the price of our own integrity. So I sit here now in the dark and contemplate the fire. It is no longer an abstract horror. It is a personal possibility, a potential end to my own story. The choice will be offered to me, as it has been to all the others: confess and live as a liar, or deny and be purified by the flame. What is a man to do? To cling to a few more miserable years of life in a cold, dark cell, my name a byword for heresy? Or to walk towards the stake, to commend my soul to the true God who knows my heart, and let the fire burn away everything but the truth? This is the grim lesson that our fate has to offer. That power, when it is absolute, can make a virtue of lies and a crime of truth. It can turn saviors into demons, and it can use the very symbols of faith to carry out the work of the devil. The fires they have lit will one day burn themselves out. The question is whether the truth will be consumed with them. Do not let that happen. Let the memory of these men who chose the agony of the fire over the comfort of a lie be a fire in your own mind. Keep the grim lessons coming. Like this record of our fate, and subscribe to this chronicle. Be the memory.
Let us, at the end of all things, speak of the reason for all things. Let us speak of the treasure. For all the talk of heresy, all the sermons on blasphemy, all the lurid tales of demonic heads and obscene rituals, this entire affair was never a matter of theology. It was a matter of accounting. King Philip did not launch a crusade to save the soul of France. He orchestrated a hostile takeover to save his own bankrupt treasury. Every rack, every pyre, every lie was simply an instrument in the greatest and most audacious robbery in the history of Christendom. The cross was their pretext, but gold was their god. They dressed their greed in the robes of piety, but the glint in the king's eye was never for the heavenly crown. He wanted the one he could melt down and mint into coins. And what a prize we were! Our order was more than a collection of castles and farms. It was the nervous system of European finance. We were the guardians of wealth for kings, nobles, and merchants. Our temple in Paris was not just a fortress, it was the royal treasury of France, a fact of sublime and fatal irony. The king sought to rob the very bank that held his own accounts. So, on that dark morning in October of 1307, when the king's men stormed our preceptories, they were not just looking for heretics. They were an army of auditors and repo men. They came with swords, but also with ledgers and lockpicks. They seized everything: the land, the livestock, the armor, the holy relics,
and they went straight for the vaults. They expected, I imagine, a scene from a dragon's hoard, mountains of gold florins, chests overflowing with jewels, the accumulated wealth of 2 centuries. The king must have salivated at the thought. But what they found was in some ways a profound disappointment for a man of his simple, greedy appetites. Yes, there was gold, there was silver, but the bulk of our wealth was not in vast, sterile piles of coin. It was working capital. It was in letters of credit, in deeds to properties, in the complex web of loans and investments that powered our enterprise. They had captured a bank, but they had expected a treasure chest. The king wanted a windfall, a single vast prize to solve all his problems. He got the assets of a sprawling, complex business that he had just murdered. And this is where the story takes a turn, where a new myth begins to sprout from the ashes of our order. For all that they seized, the whole of liquid assets, of ready gold and silver, was suspiciously light, far less than what the royal accountants had estimated. The king got his hands on our lands and our infrastructure, but the great, legendary treasure of the Templars, it seemed to have vanished. A story began to circulate, a whisper that has haunted the king's men ever since. The story of the Templar fleet at our great port of La Rochelle. It is said that in the days just before the arrests, a number of our ships slipped their moorings in the dead of night and sailed out into the Atlantic, their destination unknown. Their cargo? That, my friends, is the great question. Were they laden with the vast majority of our bullion, with our most sacred relics, with the secret archives of the order? I cannot say. Perhaps the story is just a hopeful fantasy, or perhaps our leaders, seeing the storm gathering, took precautions. Perhaps they had one last secret plan to preserve the heart of the temple. We were, after all, men who knew how to keep a secret. The treasure, oh, the treasure, the real reason for all this fuss. Did they find it all? That, my friends, is a secret even the king couldn't torture out. A little mystery for posterity and for future treasure hunters. Imagine Philip's frustration. He turns his kingdom upside down, defies the Pope, tortures thousands of men, and burns our leaders, all to crack open the vault, only to find the grand prize is already gone. It is the one part of this whole sorry affair that still brings a smile to my face. So what happened to the wealth they did seize? Officially, the Pope decreed in a bull called Ad Providam that all Templar assets were to be transferred to our brothers in the Order of the Hospital, the Knights of St. John. The wealth was to remain dedicated to the defense of Christendom. A noble and just decision on paper. In reality, it was a shell game. The king, with his characteristic audacity, presented the Pope and the Hospitallers with a bill for his services in prosecuting and destroying us. He charged the estate for the cost of the trials, the imprisonment of thousands of knights, the payment of his inquisitors and lawyers, the administration of our properties for 7 years. It was an astronomical sum. He paid himself for his own crime, out of the pockets of his victims. He plundered our treasury and then billed us for the effort. The Hospitallers, when they finally took control of our former properties, found them encumbered with enormous debts owed to the French crown. King Philip got his treasure, not through a simple seizure, but through years of cynical, bureaucratic looting. Other monarchs across Europe followed his lead. They too took their time handing over Templar assets to the Hospitallers, extracting their own administrative fees along the way. Our order was a great whale, and when it was slain, every king with a sharp knife came to carve off a piece for himself. And so the great wealth of the temple was scattered to the winds, absorbed into the treasuries of kings and the depleted coffers of our rival order. But because the liquid treasure was never found, because of those ships that sailed from La Rochelle, the legend was born, the legend of the lost Templar treasure. It is our final, posthumous revenge, a ghost that will forever haunt the greedy. For centuries, men will dig up the floors of our old chapels. They will search for coded maps on our gravestones. They will dream of finding that vast hidden hoard. They will associate our name not just with our tragic end, but with enduring mystery and unimaginable wealth. Perhaps the treasure is gold, buried somewhere in a secret vault. Perhaps it is knowledge contained in the archives that vanished. Some have even whispered that our true treasure was a sacred object, the Holy Grail itself, or some secret about the nature of Christ that would shake Christendom to its foundations. The King and the Pope accused us of hiding monstrous secrets. It is only fitting that we leave them with one, a tantalizing mystery that they can never solve. They have burned our bodies and stolen our lands, but this one thing, this legend, is beyond their grasp. It is a treasure they can hunt for forever and never find. But let me tell you the nature of our true treasure. It was not gold or silver. Our true treasure was our brotherhood, our faith, and the honor we upheld for 200 years. It was the legacy of our service, written not in ledgers, but in the history of the Holy Land. The king could seize our property, but he could not seize that. This message, this testament from the dark, is a part of that treasure. It is a map, not to a chest of gold, but to the truth, a truth that has been buried under a mountain of lies, a truth that has been washed in the blood of martyrs. If this record survives, then the most valuable part of the temple has escaped the king's grasp. The story of our fall is a lesson, a warning that will echo through the ages. It's about what happens when a powerful leader decides that his need for wealth is more important than justice, truth, or faith. It is about how easily a hero can be recast as a villain to justify a crime. So, if you are still processing this monumental heist, if you are still marveling at the sheer audacity of a king who robbed his own bankers and got the Pope to approve it, then you have understood the heart of our story. You have found the real treasure. Now you must become its guardian. The king and his propagandists wrote their version of history in fire and blood. We must write ours in memory and truth. Do not let their story be the only one that is told. Help us preserve this last testament. Subscribe to this chronicle, become a keeper of the flame, and ensure that the true treasure of the Templars, our story, is never lost to the darkness.
The static is growing louder now. It sounds like the wind howling over the ruins of our fallen castles in the east, a lonely, desolate sound. Soon it will consume my voice entirely. This is the end of the transmission, the final broadcast from a dying order. My name is Brother Thomas, and I have been your chronicler from this cold, dark cell, a witness to the final, shuddering collapse of the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon. We have journeyed together through the long, sad story of our fall, from our humble beginnings protecting pilgrims to the heights of our power as the bankers of Christendom. We have seen our purpose wither with the loss of the Holy Land, our wealth become a target for a greedy king, and our faith used as a weapon against us. We have walked through the smoke of the pyre and heard the echoes of the torture chamber. It was a perfect storm of betrayal. We were betrayed by the crown of France, a monarchy so mired in debt that it saw our treasury as the only solution. King Philip the Fair, a man whose piety was a performance and whose ruthlessness was a reality, orchestrated this entire affair not to cleanse the faith, but to cleanse his own ledgers. We were simply the largest, most inconvenient line item in his budget, an asset to be liquidated. We were betrayed by the Holy See. Pope Clement V, the shepherd of the flock, chose to save his own skin rather than his most loyal sheep. He was a man trapped in a gilded cage, and when the wolf howled at the door, he threw us out to save himself. His complicity, his cowardice, was the deepest wound of all. A king's greed is a worldly evil, but a pope's betrayal is a spiritual catastrophe. And finally, we were subjected to a process where the truth was an obstacle, where innocence was a death sentence and a lie was the only path to survival. Our trials were a theater of the grotesque, our forced confessions the script, and our burning bodies the grand finale. The system designed to protect the innocent was expertly wielded to destroy us. They have taken our lands, melted down our chalices, and spent our gold. King Philip has his victory, but a question lingers, a ghost at the king's feast. Did they get it all, the great treasure, the heart of our wealth? Or did a few brave brothers on a few swift ships spirit it away into the night? That is a delightful mystery, is it not? A final riddle from the temple, a parting gift to the world that will keep the greedy searching for centuries. Our revenge is to be a legend they can never truly possess. But our real legacy is not a hidden hoard of gold. It is this story. It is a timeless warning about the terrifying intersection of power, greed, and piety. It is a lesson in how propaganda can turn heroes into monsters overnight. It is a testament to the fact that even the strongest institutions can be brought down from within, betrayed by the very people they serve. And so, as the sun rises on a dawn where justice is a jest and loyalty a liability, this has been Brother Thomas, your humble and soon-to-be martyred broadcaster from the final hours of the Knights Templar. We felt the steel, saw the lies, and were utterly, undeniably betrayed by the cross. If this desperate, darkly humorous transmission from the very heart of medieval intrigue has given you a moment of profound contemplation, or perhaps made you eye your bank's vaults with renewed suspicion, then my purpose is served. Keep listening, keep questioning, and for the sake of truth, keep that subscribe button pressed, because even when an order falls, the echoes of injustice and a very persistent myth of hidden gold remain. Until the next broadcast, perhaps from a very crowded purgatory. Deus non vult.